Storytelling is a gift that comes naturally to all of us. We don't have to think about telling stories. We don't have to craft them. We've been telling stories all of our lives, and they come easy to us. They come instinctually. For example, when you go home tonight and your spouse or your significant other or your roommate asks, "How was your day?" you're not just going to reel off a list of occurrences from the moment you woke up. I got out of bed, I took a shower, I ate breakfast, I went to the front door, I walked to my car, I got in my car. Now you pick out the most interesting or strangest or funniest thing that happened, and you just start telling the tale of what happened. You don't have to sit down and craft it. You're not thinking about plot or climax or characters. You just tell stories. We've been doing this generation after generation. It's how we warn people, it's how we convince them, it's how we convey ideas. So this gift for storytelling is something that I want you to be able to take online, because there's power in digital storytelling, in reaching an audience beyond just the people around you. My name's Kwon. I'm a consultant from Birmingham, and I'm also the conference director for Y'all Connect, which is a digital marketing conference in Birmingham. And it's a pleasure to be back at Craft Content Nashville. I spoke here last year, and it's always fun to drive up I-65 and see my friends in Nashville and come to this event and not only get a chance to speak, but a chance to learn and to meet all of you. So I'm going to talk about the power of storytelling. As you can tell, there are no slides. But at the end, if you stick around, I'll tell you how to get a copy of the presentation, including the video and the outline and some additional resources that I can email to you. If you have questions, just raise your hand. Don't wait till the end. I'll be happy to take questions whenever they come up. You can tweet this presentation if you want to. The hashtag is CCN16StoryPower. You can share it on Twitter, you can share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn. My Twitter name's @WaitOnTweets, so if you want, you can tag me in the tweets as well. But there are a couple of areas I want to talk about in terms of this power of digital storytelling. How to define your story and how to tell it. Because you've got lots of options, and you've got to find a way to focus your story so that you understand it, your colleagues understand it, your audience understands it. Why is it so important that you be able to take your natural ability to tell stories and share them in blog posts or Twitter or Facebook or videos or emails? There are a couple of reasons. For starters, just by making some small adjustments in what you do now in terms of your storytelling, you'll be able to tell stories more effectively online. But it's an audience that isn't affected by time or geography. It's an audience that can grow with you, your company, your business, your brand. So if there's an audience that you're trying to reach that isn't just in Nashville, or doesn't operate just in 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, these avenues open up a bigger audience for you that you can reach. There are some challenges in digital storytelling that aren't in traditional storytelling. When you pick up a book, when you go watch a movie, you watch it or read it from beginning to end. With digital storytelling, you come in at random points in the story, and so it's hard to convey a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we'll talk about some ways to get around that obstacle. But starting out, I want you to be able to define your story, to get at what is the heart of what your business is about, or what you are about. Before I went into consulting and before I started working on this conference, I worked in journalism, print side, so I worked at newspapers and magazines. And so I worked at a daily newspaper, and it was 100 years old by the time I got there. I worked at another newspaper, it was getting close to 50 years old. And I worked at a magazine, it was almost 40 years old when I started there. These companies had well-established stories. The reporters and the salespeople, they knew what the story was. The subscribers, the readers, they knew what the story was. Even the advertisers knew it. So it was my job as a new employee to just kind of get caught up and figure out what chapter I could add to this company's story. So the company that you work for, if it's been around a while, it has an established story. You might not have any problem defining it or understanding it. But if you work at a startup, if you work at a new company, if you work at a company that's been around for only a couple of years and it's just getting off the ground, you may be trying to figure out what is the story. You might be trying to figure it out even if at an established company. If it's fuzzy and people have different perceptions of what the story is, what the history of the company is, it may be harder to pin down. But a question comes up regularly, which is it okay to tell my story even if we're still putting it together, even if we're still defining it? It happens a lot at startups. And the answer is absolutely yes. It's okay to tell that story as you're going along. I mentioned that I do this digital marketing conference in Birmingham called Y'all Connect, and we started in 2013. The story that I told about Y'all Connect in 2013 really isn't that much different than the one I tell in 2016, because it's a very short history. So in 2013, 2014, 2015, the story moved along incrementally. But essentially the story is there wasn't a blogging and social media conference like it in Birmingham or Alabama. I kept waiting for someone to start one and no one did. So I took it upon myself to do it, and it's grown every year. We've had some success in putting on this annual event. But the story in 2016 is different from the story I would have told at the beginning when we were just getting it off the ground. And so your story will obviously evolve as you add new chapters, as there are twists and turns in the saga. And you know, as a small business owner, the story that you have planned next isn't always the way it turns out. And so you have to be ready for any twists and turns as you tell your story to prospective customers, to prospective employees, to people that you meet. But yeah, as you're starting up a business, as it's growing, as it's changing, it's okay to tell the story, even if the story isn't fully written yet. But the challenge for some of you may be to define the story so that it's readily accessible, so that you can stay focused, so that it's understandable. When I worked at the newspaper, we had a writing coach. His name was Clark Stallworth, and he had been at the newspaper a long time. He was a veteran writer and a veteran editor, and so I was lucky enough to learn from him when he coached me and other reporters and editors. And he took people through exercises to help them sharpen their stories. So he'd sit down with the reporter, and so the reporter would have his notes, and he'd have his transcripts, and he'd have his tape recordings and interviews, and he'd be sitting down to write a story, and Clark would ask him, tell me your story in one sentence. So the reporter would think about it, and he might have just come back from like a city council meeting, and so the story in one sentence. The city council is getting ready to vote on a zoning ordinance that may allow some new businesses downtown. That's very straightforward. That's easy to understand. It's practically the headline for the story. So a reporter just starts out at the top of the screen with that sentence. And as he's writing the story, looking through his notes, listening to his interviews, getting it all sorted, everything that pertains to that sentence goes into the story. Everything that doesn't pertain to that sentence does not go in the story. So he could write a tightly focused, understandable, coherent, beginning to end story focused on that sentence. As you think about what your business's story is, figure out how to tell it in a single sentence. Because as you engage in marketing, as you engage in digital storytelling, everything related to that sentence belongs. Everything not related to that sentence doesn't belong. So there is a way to get it down to like elevator pitch size, where you just have one sentence that defines what that story is so that you can stay focused on it as you continue to tell your story over and over again. It's easy to get lost in the shuffle, especially if you're in a small business, of like the day-to-day fires to put out and tasks that you have to do, maintaining focus on what the story is. That's why getting it down to a sentence helps you maintain what it's all about. Clark had another exercise. So after he talked to the reporter about what the story was in one sentence, he'd push him a little further and ask, what is the story in one word? Could be an adjective, could be a noun. but he really, really wanted to get at the heart of what the story was about. So the reporter, he said that the city council is getting ready to vote on a zoning ordinance that might allow new businesses downtown. So the reporter might say the story is about development, or progress, or business, because these are single words that get to the heart of what the story is about. Y'all Connect, in one sentence, Y'all Connect is a conference in Birmingham that offers practical takeaways in digital marketing. That's our one sentence story. But if you ask me to get it down to a word, it might be training, or marketing, or practical. I'd even throw in service because we emphasize a lot on customer service, and we want that to be reflected in our event and our outreach and how we interact with people online and in real life. So when you take time to think about your company's story and write down that one sentence as to what that story is, think about what one word captures what your business is all about. I'll give you an exercise to practice on. So by show of hands, how many of you have read the Bible? How many of you have studied it at either home or at church? Okay, so some of you, many of you should be able to answer this. An alien lands on Earth, is unfamiliar with everything on Earth, walks up to you, and understands that the Bible is one of the most widely read books on planet Earth. So the alien asks you specifically about the New Testament. The story of the New Testament. If you were to take the story of the New Testament and tell the alien in one word what it's about, what word would you pick?
Redemption.
Redemption.
Good.
Love.
Love?
Love, yes.
Good. So, redemption and love. I've heard other audiences tell me Jesus and grace. So, the New Testament is thousands of words long. You've been able to take all of it and give it to someone unfamiliar with it into a single word. Can you do that with your own story, with your own company, with your own brand? Try it when you have some time. Ask your colleagues to take the same exercise. See what their one sentence is. Or ask your biggest fans, your best customers, or people who know your company, your brand, your story fairly well. That sentence should help your company stand out from all the competitors out there and all the lookalikes. That one word should help keep you focused on it. So defining your story to tell online, first know that it's okay that you can tell it as your story is developing, that it doesn't have to be fully formed and complete before you're ready to tell it to an audience. That especially goes double for startups and new companies. And then look to these two exercises to sum up the story in one sentence and one word to make sure that you can maintain tight focus. Because we're going to talk about that in this next section. And the second part is, how do you tell the story? You've got so many options in the digital world. You have hundreds of social media channels. You have email marketing. You have ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, Twitter ads, banner ads, pop-up ads. You have video. You have photos. You have Snapchat. You have text messaging. You have all kinds of options to reach this virtual audience. 3 aspects will help you focus how to tell the story. That's channel, voice, and brand. And we're going to go over each of those. But you want to focus on the options to tell your story that are a best fit for you, for your brand, for your company, and for where your audience is. So the first aspect is channel. Channel's pretty straightforward. It's the platform on which you tell your story, and you might use more than one channel to do so. If you've used traditional marketing and media, you may have used television commercials or radio commercials or billboards or direct mail pieces or print ads in magazines and newspapers. You may have had events and open houses. But as I pointed out, with the wide array of channels available to you, what is the key to telling a good story in this medium? Take Twitter, for instance. I've used Twitter for years. I'm a big fan of it. And it's interesting. I mean, how many of you use Twitter for your business? So you know how it works. You can send out tweets, you can follow people, you can monitor Twitter and so on. But each tweet's limited to 140 characters, and if I were to tell the story of my event, Y'all Connect, over the course of a year, how many tweets do I think it would take to tell the story adequately? My best estimate is 10,000 tweets in a year. Now that sounds like a lot, but if I put it together into one document, it's probably like 3 or 4 chapters of a book. You could probably read it in an hour. But it takes a long time to write 10,000 tweets and to post them throughout a year. I'm not going to post them all in a single day. The real challenge is, let's say you're following Y'all Connect on Twitter. I'll be lucky if you see, and this is being generous, 1% of those tweets. 100 tweets over the course of 52 weeks. That's 2 tweets a week. That means you might see a tweet from me tomorrow, and then Thursday, and then the following Monday, and so on. How on earth can I tell a story if you're going to see 1 out of every 100 tweets? That's like jumping into a book and just read every 100th word and trying to make a coherent story out of it. Each tweet that I write to tell the story has to reflect that one sentence. Y'all Connect is a conference in Birmingham that gives practical takeaways in digital marketing. It has to reflect that one word: marketing, practical, training. Not that I can write that same sentence over and over again for 10,000 tweets. That wouldn't be a very interesting story. But if I make sure that each tweet is permeated with our brand values and our story focus, I have at least a shot to capture people's attention. I have a shot at letting them know what the story is. And if they're interested, they'll follow along. They'll click the link. They'll read some more tweets. They'll follow the brand on Twitter. They'll subscribe to the newsletter. They'll do something. If they're not interested, that is perfectly fine. You do not want audiences that don't invest in your story. Why would you go waste 2 hours in the theater to see the epic sci-fi saga of a band of rebels working together to bring down an evil galactic empire? That's the story you're going to get for 2 hours and for $10. If you don't care about that, definitely do not go see it. But if you do care about it, then at least you have a fighting shot to enjoy the story that's unfolding before you. But it's up to me to write consistently on Twitter so that story is reflected in every tweet, so that every stranger who sees the story can figure out, yeah, I need some help with marketing. Yeah, I need to understand social media better. Yeah, I'm within driving distance of Birmingham, so this makes sense. But if not interested, that's fine. I've been blogging for about 11 years, so I blog on the Y'all Connect site, and it takes a series of blog posts to get attention and SEO traffic and so on. Same problem. Over the course of a year, how many blog posts would I need to write to adequately tell the story of Y'all Connect? Let's say 50 to 100, so 1 to 2 a week. And I write maybe 1 a week to 1.5 a week. But I know that knowing that no one in this room is going to read all 100 posts. I could pay you. You're not going to read all 100 posts. You might, at best, read 3 to 5 posts. As our keynoter pointed out, you might skim it, you might just look at the headline, and then you just move on. It's up to me to make sure that that story is reflected in every single blog post from the headline on down, so that if it's a story of interest to you, you'll keep following along. But it's a story that you're going to read out of order. You pick up a book, you go see a movie, you see it from beginning to end, you read it from beginning to end. I write this blog for you, and you come in on chapter 98, and you might jump to chapter 45, and then jump half to chapter 52, and then you're out. there's no way to tell a coherent story from beginning to end. Because even if I write it in order, you're not going to start reading the blog from post number 1 and read it in order to where we are today. So each blog post has to reflect what the story is about. It has to be self-contained. That narrative has to stand on its own. One more example of channel. So if you're using Instagram as a way to market your company or to just interact with users, visual medium, so you're just sharing photos and maybe a little bit of text. How many photos would it take, how many Instagram posts would it take over the course of a year? Let's say 1,000, which is a lot. That's 3 photos a day that you're sharing from your Instagram account. That's more probably than the average Instagram user, and that's probably barely enough to make a dent so that people can pick up on what you're doing. Because if you're posting 3 times a day and your followers only see 1 or 2 photos a week, each photo has to reflect what the story is about. That's why you go through those exercises of focusing on your story in 1 sentence or in 1 word. But through channel, as you can see, what I'm preaching is consistency. That you post regularly and that it reflects what your story is about. That way, the audience that wants to know more about your story can follow along, and the audience that doesn't care will move along. But I'm sure you've seen Facebook pages that represent companies where the story just stops, and it just stopped 5 months ago. And so it doesn't matter how good a storyteller they are, there are no more chapters that they're putting out there. So you as a casual visitor or reader, you got no more narrative to latch onto. That's why I'm preaching this consistency of putting out the story on your channel. Whether it's through email or blog posts or YouTube videos or however you pick. A second aspect of how to tell your story is the voice. 2 ways to go with voice. You could have 1 unified voice, or you could have multiple voices. Coming from a newspaper background, I'm familiar with that institutional voice. If you go read a bunch of articles from the Wall Street Journal, whether you read it in the print edition or through the app or through the website, you're going to notice that they have a similar voice, that the writers and editors have worked hard to make sure that it reflects the brand and the voice of the Wall Street Journal. So that way, if you read a bunch of articles from the New York Times or BuzzFeed or the Huffington Post, you'll notice each one has a distinct brand voice. Companies that aren't newspapers, that aren't media companies, use singular voices all the time. They may do it through their ad agency, they may do it through their in-house marketing department, they may do it because there's only one person in charge of their blog, their social media, their email, newsletter, and everything else. So then it's really easy to write in one voice because there's only one sad, overworked person trying to manage all of it. The advantage of using one voice is everything that has to do with the company reflects this voice. So it's easy to pick up on, it's easy for people to connect with, there's this consistency across the board. There is no right answer, by the way, whether you go with one voice or multiple voices. You can switch between the 2. If one approach isn't working, go try the other one, but it really just depends on what your audience is, what your goals are, and how you're telling your story. Multiple voices might reflect everyone in the marketing department, or it might reflect multiple departments that face the public, sales and customer service and research and public relations and so on. But each person not only reflects the company's story, but also their individuality. The benefit there is you might attract a wider audience because everyone who sort of connects with the company story might connect directly with the individual telling the story. When I'm talking about y'all connect, I've got a very narrow worldview and perspective. So I'm not going to even try to represent the point of view of women, or the point of view of people in their 60s, or the point of view of people in their 20s. But I put as diverse a lineup on stage so that our speakers can help reflect the diversity of people who are in the audience, because they'll connect with the faces on stage, they'll connect with what they have to say, and there are different experiences and different backgrounds and different points of view and different levels of expertise. So whether you choose to go with singular voice or multiple voices, it depends on what you're after, but know that those are among the options of how you tell that story online. The last aspect is brand. Brand is interesting because brand is both what we craft, what we want people to perceive us as, and then what people perceive the brand as, or the company as. Apple spends millions of dollars on their branding. Commercials and advertisements and big product launches. And the brand that I think they're trying to convey is they're luxurious, priced above the normal, they're hip, and they've got the features that the right people want. That's the brand they're trying to craft. If the perception, though, is that they're overpriced, or it doesn't work well, or it's too hipster, then they've got a big problem, because there's a disconnect between the brand that they want to be and the brand that people perceive them to be. And perception, in that case, is reality. The brand I'm talking about in telling digital stories boils down to, how is your story reflected in each platform that you're sharing the story on? I mentioned earlier Facebook pages. I've seen a lot of Facebook pages in working with clients and potential clients. Facebook pages for companies and startups and entrepreneurs. And a Facebook page might be robust, it might have up-to-date information, it might have great photos and great links to blog posts and articles, or the last post may have been from 5 months ago, and the questions that people leave on the Facebook page go unanswered. That brand is telling me a story, and it's not a very good story. A story is essentially, we don't care about anyone on Facebook, we don't care how we look to anyone, and we don't care enough to maintain this Facebook page that we started 2 years ago. That brand is reflected in your website. If your website is easy to use and has all the information that I as a consumer need and loads on my phone properly, that's a good story that I'm hearing. But if it's clunky, if it's out of date, if it has broken or missing images, if it doesn't load on my phone, it's telling me that other story that the brand probably doesn't intend to tell. So the branding that comes from each platform can positively or negatively reflect on your story and your company as a whole. Keep that in mind as you pick out where you're going to tell your story, because you can unintentionally derail the narrative by not maintaining it. So in how to tell your story, you've got channel, voice, and brand to consider in narrowing down all the options. If you have questions, my contact information is on the postcard. Email me, tweet me. I'll be happy to answer any questions about storytelling. You may have them today, you may have them in a week, but I'm happy to take those questions whenever they come up. So as you're taking your storytelling skills and tweaking them to tell online, you know why it's important, you know how to focus it by doing those exercises, and you know that you have to consider channel, voice, and brand to determine how you're going to tell it online. But by taking advantage of it, by becoming better digital storytellers, you're going to reach a better audience, you're going to be more confident in your storytelling, and everyone is going to live happily ever after. Thank you.